Tonight, our speaker is Alison Stevens. She is the SNAP Outreach and Training Coordinator at the Illinois Hunger Coalition. I first learned about Alison was from a webinar class I took last year. She tracks the development of evolving SNAP and Medicaid policy in Illinois, while working closely with government agencies, community providers, and benefit recipients. She has trained hundreds of providers and understands the complex issues inside out. Prior to working with the Illinois Hunger Coalition, Alison served as a Medicaid policy resource for attorneys and other staff at the Legal Assistance Foundation. Please welcome Alison Stevens.
I feel vested with so much authority behind here. But thank you for having me. So I'm here to talk a lot about kind of what our organization does in general, but also talk about kind of some specific issues that you might be interested in about SNAP that's going on, and to kind of go through a particular issue to illustrate the work that we do. So first of all, we are a statewide private nonprofit organization. We do cover the entire state, and our goal is basically to fight hunger both by addressing the systems, the symptoms of hunger by providing direct services, but also by trying to find solutions to the actual causes of hunger. So we do more systemic work, like with legislation and with community organizing as well. So first I want to talk about the direct services that we do. We do have a statewide hunger hotline that people can call from anywhere in Illinois. We keep a running list of all of the food pantries in the state. So when somebody calls, we can ask them where they are, what their address is, and we can look up the closest food pantries to them. We can tell them, the day that that food pantry is open, or days, the times, whether that food pantry is restricted to certain zip codes or whether they are completely open. We can give them multiple food pantries, but we also try to be able to refer people to more than just food pantries. So we try to...
Could you explain what SNAP and TANF are and what the differences is?
Yes. So in addition to referrals, we do applications for Medicaid, SNAP, and TANF. These are three different types of public benefits. So Medicaid is essentially free health insurance for people who are below a certain income level. SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. I'm going to be getting a little bit more into detail with that later. But TANF stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. It's essentially a cash benefits program.
They dropped the name, it's just now called cash assistance.
TANF?
TANF is no longer called TANF. Hasn't been for a few years.
The state calls it TANF.
The state calls it cash assistance if you go into any of the DHS offices.
Well, I work directly with DHS. They call it TANF.
Okay.
So.
I do too, and they told me that it's no longer called TANF. Okay.
The local office administrators call it TANF. So I don't know about some of the caseworkers, but it's officially still TANF. Anyway, so I'll be getting into SNAP later. But Temporary Assistance for Needy Families is a cash assistance program for mostly pregnant women or women with young children. So we do offer referrals to not just food pantries, but also health clinics, places that offer housing for homeless veterans. During tax season, we keep track of places that offer free tax assistance, basically anything that we think people who are calling might find helpful. And we also do case management. So for example, if somebody is on Medicaid or TANF or SNAP, is dealing with a Department of Human Services office and they're having problems. So for example, if their benefits have been incorrectly canceled or decreased, then we will work directly with the local DHS office to help get that resolved. And then also people can just call with questions, and we oftentimes do just answer their questions about their case or about if they think they might want to apply for benefits. I do want to mention we do not do walk-ins, we do everything over the phone. So the other main thing that we do direct service-wise, other than the hunger hotline, is that we do direct outreach. So we have people who go out into the community and who will do applications for the public benefits programs I mentioned earlier, and who will also do case management and answer questions. We have people who go out to the Chicago community colleges as well as community colleges all over southern Illinois. We also have people who go to VA clinics, to the Cook County jails to do applications, court buildings on particular court dates, and food pantries and senior housing, and basically anywhere else that we can think of to try to help people get enrolled. So a lot of what we do, as I said before, is focused on resolving hunger on a more large scale, rather than just kind of helping people deal with the symptoms of it. So as Bonnie mentioned, I am the training coordinator, so one of the things that we do is we do policy trainings. So I will go to usually community providers, so for example, health clinics, homeless shelters, places that serve people who are on public benefits, and I will train them on policy, particularly Medicaid, again, free health insurance for people below a certain income level, and SNAP, which again I will be getting into a bit more in detail later. I also do train some of the DHS office staff on some Medicaid issues by the request of their office administrators. And I've also done trainings with people who are actually on benefits, so seniors, families of persons with intellectual developmental disabilities. Basically, we try to fill in the gaps of knowledge where oftentimes, policy is not necessarily communicated very well to the community, and many times the people who are making those decisions are not even communicating it sometimes to their own staff, the ones who are implementing it. So we try to find those gaps and fill it. And so now I'm going to train you a little bit on kind of one of the issues that we've been working on and take you through what we've been doing with it. So that is SNAP Employment and Training. So what is SNAP? Well, SNAP, again, stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Many people know it better as food stamps. It used to be known as food stamps, but they did change the name. It is a federal program that is administered by the state, and basically it allows low-income individuals and families to get some help paying for groceries, essentially. The way it works is that once somebody is approved for SNAP, they will get a card called a link card. There's a picture. And then they can take it to a grocery store or other approved places that sell food. And they have a certain amount of money that is put on that card every month. That amount of money varies a lot depending on, first, how low that person's income is, and then how high their basic necessary expenses are. So for example,
are you going to be talking at all about the process of getting approved? What income level, etc.?
One of the flyers that I have back there, the lavender flyer, has the income limits for both SNAP and for Medicaid. If you at all want me to kind of go over how to read that, I can do so. When they're determining if somebody is eligible, first they're always going to go by the income limit, which you do have. And in order to figure out the income limit, they have to figure out who is in the household, because the income limit depends on the household size. So obviously the income limit is much larger for a household of 5 than it is for a household of 2. And the way they determine household for the SNAP program is basically who is living together and who is buying and preparing food together. So it's both of these things. So you can have people who are roommates, they live together but they don't share food much. They actually are not in the same household. There is an exception to that, however, and that is that if somebody is under the age of 22 and is living with their parents, they are automatically considered part of the same household, even if the parents are not sharing their food. with the child. It's the same with a minor and a parent caretaker who is not actually their parent, and also spouses. You might have two people who are married and living together, but they consider themselves to be separated. They don't speak and they don't share money or food. I have run into this. Maybe one of them is an earner and the other is not, but the earner is not sharing their food or money. Unfortunately, as long as they are married and living together, they are going to be considered part of the same household. So those are the exceptions. And then also citizenship and documentation are taken into account. There are some instances in which people who are not either citizens or people who are lawful permanent residents for at least 5 years have a green card for at least 5 years. Usually you have to fit into those two categories to get SNAP. There are a few exceptions, but it's really, really difficult. And then in some cases, as we'll be getting to, employment can be required for somebody to be approved for SNAP or to get SNAP. So the work requirement, and that ABODS is basically our way of saying able-bodied adults without dependents, because that takes a really long time to say if you're saying it repeatedly, which I will be. If at any point you need me to spell that out again, just raise your hand and let me know. But basically, it's important to know that in Illinois, there is only one group currently that must meet a work requirement in order to get SNAP benefits. And those are people who are in higher education or vocational training, half-time or more, so mostly college students. They actually have a harder time getting SNAP than anyone else. And, I have met college students who were actually homeless, but who could not get SNAP because they were not working, even though they had no income.
Is that an Illinois requirement or a federal requirement?
That is a federal requirement. Actually, in the United States, there's a federal law saying that everybody who is an able-bodied adult without dependents, who they must be working, or they get SNAP for 3 months out of a 3-year period. So basically, they will be kicked off if they are not working by the end of those 3 months, unless they have a registered disability or are a minor or a senior, or have a very young child. And Illinois, that is actually not the case. We have a waiver from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that allows us to keep these people on benefits for longer than 3 months. And that is basically because we do verifiably have more people looking for work than we have jobs. So because of that, we've been able to be exempt from this federal requirement. However, this is a waiver that we have to, the governor has to apply for every year. Governor Rauner has been reluctant to do so. We have been able to convince him to do so for 2 years so far. He just applied recently, so we are safe for another year. But as of January 2018, he will have to apply again, which our understanding is he does not want to. And unfortunately, by January 8, 2018, there will likely be some areas of the state that will no longer qualify for the waiver because the economic system has improved in those areas. However, there will be some areas of Illinois that will still qualify for that.
How many hours needs to be worked in order to qualify?
20 hours a week, yeah. And also, just to point out, the 3 months out of a 3-year period do not have to be consecutive. So you can have somebody who is on SNAP for 2 months, then they get a job, they get off SNAP, and then a year later, they end up losing their job, so they get back on SNAP. They can only be on SNAP for 1 month before they're kicked off. So this is just to kind of introduce you to the people who make up the able-bodied adults without dependents. On average, they have a gross income of 19% of the federal poverty level. As some of you may know, the federal poverty level is very low. So basically, on average, they make $2,200 a year. So these are people who really, really struggle to feed themselves. There is kind of an assumption that, somebody who is declared able-bodied, an adult, without dependents, they're fine to go to work. Unfortunately, homeless people often have a really, really hard time getting jobs, and they are not exempt from this. And also, a lot of the people who have the most severe disabilities, particularly behavioral mental health disabilities, have a really, really hard time getting through the system to get your disability approved. So many of the time, even though they are severely disabled, it doesn't show up that way in the system, and they are considered an ABOD. And then, of course, there's also ex-offenders who have an enormously difficult time getting work. So I do want to mention that just because, the government likes being extra confusing, there is the able-bodied adult without dependents work requirement. There is the college student work requirement. And then there's also the generic SNAP employment and training work requirement. Those are three separate things. So even though we do have the waiver in Illinois, which means that the ABOD requirement we are exempt from, the state still does have the right to call people in and basically tell them, we need you to get involved in employment and training, either get a job or get into one of these training programs. And if you do not cooperate, we will kick you off of benefits. They do still have the legal right to do that. This is something that has not been done that much under previous administrations, but under Governor Rauner, there has been a really big emphasis on bringing people in and telling them that they need to get employed or they will lose their benefits. They've been calling in hundreds of people every day to the local Department of Human Services offices. The show rate of people actually coming into the office has usually been below 10%. And if people don't show up, then their benefits are ended. And they stop getting help paying for food. So this is a really severe problem right now. EPIC is something that you may or may not have heard of. It's being brought up a lot in the state. It's less relevant for you all because it does not affect DuPage. But it is essentially a pilot program that the state is running to see whether providing kind of wraparound extra services to people will help them be able to get employed more effectively and stay employed or in training. So it involves 5,000 people across the state. It's in multiple counties, again, not DuPage. And 2,500 of them are basically the control group. So they just get told they need to get employment training. They don't get any special help. And then 2,500 get a lot more assistance, where they will get, assistance paying for transportation. They may get help getting equipment for a job, like, a hard hat for a construction worker. They would actually get supplied with that. They might get help getting childcare for their child. Unfortunately, the EPIC pilot has not been implemented very well. And there have been a lot of problems, but again, it's not really that relevant to DuPage. For the most part, it's just people being called in and told that they have to find a job, and this is happening in DuPage. So when we do come across an issue like this, there are a number of ways that we address it. So, we have worked very much on the ABOD issue for the past couple of years. As I mentioned, we have been able to convince Governor Rauner twice to apply for the waiver. And And that has involved on-the-ground community organizing, which we do, in neighborhoods with people who are actually on public benefits. Basically, we try to develop leaders there so that they can educate their neighbors about the issue and mobilize their neighbors. We bring them to Springfield to talk to their legislators, and we also organize town halls where they can speak and they can tell their own stories. And we've had them speaking to people about these issues at bus stops, train stops, intersections, other social service organizations, food pantries, etc. Basically, we do think that empowering the actual communities that are receiving these benefits is the best way that we can defend them if they can tell their own stories. One of the things that we do is we call them Community Quality Council meetings, and these are meetings that we convene at local Department of Human Services offices. We co-convene them with the local office administrator, the person who's in charge of the office. And basically, community providers come, so the local homeless organizations, the local food pantries, the local immigrant organizations will come to these meetings. And they will get to talk to the office management about, if, for example, I've been seeing a lot of people coming to me saying that, caseworkers have been treating them badly because they're Spanish speakers. I will bring that to the office management, or that people have not been getting the letters telling them to come into the office. I can bring that to the office management, and then they can share information about, where they are with applications, or if they are struggling with a particular issue or don't understand a particular policy. It's a great way to be able to get the DHS offices to work with the community. And we've been able to get the DHS offices to, as much as they can, advocate for the waiver in the past, because for them having to call in 216,000 people to try to get them employed is going to be a nightmare. So it is in their best interest as well, and we've been able to work with that. And then we do work with the General Assembly. We created a written report about the able-bodied adults without dependents issue that highlighted both the consequences it would have for the population as well as the financial consequences it would have for Illinois. A common misconception that a lot of legislators, conservative usually legislators, have about SNAP or food stamps is the idea that it costs the state money. SNAP benefits are 100% federal funding. And in general, on average, a dollar in food stamps or SNAP produces about $1.75 in the local economy. So it is actually an enormous stimulus in low-income communities across the state. So, taking away that waiver or reducing the number of people who are receiving SNAP, even if they're eligible, actually hurts the state financially. Mm-hmm.
So why is Rounder against, possibly against re-signing it if it doesn't take anything from the Illinois funds?
It's not a financial question. I think it's an ideological one. There is a certain sector that really truly believes that the government should not be filling that role and should not be helping people do that.
Madigan's probably for it.
Madigan supports the waiver, yeah.
There you go.
So we've been able to work with the chair of the House Human Services and Appropriations Committee. He specifically reached out to the governor after we worked with him to try to convince him to sign the waiver. We also brought it to the leaders in the Black and Latino caucuses, who are also extremely concerned. So basically we're able to leverage a lot of different groups from a lot of different directions to pressure the governor. So this is all kind of talking about the past couple of years. Going forward, as I mentioned, in 2018, there will be some areas of the state that will not even be eligible. So there will be some areas of the state where, even if we do convince them to apply for the waiver, people who were able to get SNAP before will no longer be able to get it if they cannot get an employment and training. So we're really going to focus going forward on potentially trying to expand the definition of ABODs. We would really like to get homeless people included in that group so that they are not required to work to get help with food. We'd like to be able to expand the requirements for what is counted as a disability. So ensuring that somebody does not have to submit a letter from a psychiatrist. At least in Chicago, our mayor closed half of our mental health clinics. So actually being able to get a letter from a psychiatrist is not necessarily an easy thing to do, certainly not on a timely manner. So we'd like to be a letter from any social service provider would basically be, taken at their word that this person has a disability. So there are a number of things that we can do. And there currently is a shell bill that has been submitted to the General Assembly. A shell bill is basically when a bill is put in because there's a deadline coming up where you can no longer submit bills. There's barely anything written in the bill. It's basically just kind of a placeholder. And in the meantime, a bunch of groups are talking about what that bill would be. And we'll be able to amend it later where they will basically be able to make the bill what it will actually be. And we are heading up a work group specifically looking at the SNAP employment and training issue. And it involves the Chicago Community Jobs Council as well as specific jobs and trainings providers as well as legislative staff. And we are considering at this point trying to get the law changed so that employment and training across Illinois is voluntary rather than mandatory. There are some states where that is the case, like Washington State. So we would like to be able to try to push that through. Again, there are a lot of challenges there, but one of the things that we really pride ourselves at the Hunger Coalition is kind of tackling hunger and these issues from multiple directions, which we have found to be the most effective. And I do also want to mention that we do have a bill before the General Assembly right now, which will make it easier for college students or students in vocational training to get SNAP without having to meet the work requirement, or rather it would make it easier for them to meet the work requirement. So for example, those who are receiving Pell Grants, they would be able to be considered to be meeting the work requirement. It would expand the number of classes that would be considered employment and training. So that is currently before the General Assembly. It is something that you can support, and I can give you information on that. So yeah, basically we have a year to prepare for the loss of the waiver. And this is my information. You can please feel free to reach out to me. One of the flyers on the table over there, the green flyer, is a list of the different trainings that I do. So if you know of people who could use one of those trainings, or if you would like me to return to do more training on actual policy, I would be happy to do so. Basically, my job is shout it from the rooftops, as many places and as often as I can. So, sorry, in the front.
I noticed that there were age categories 18 to 49 that had
Yes.
to work. What if you're 50 or and above? What about that?
Then you do not have to work to get SNAP.
I see.
Yeah. So if you're a minor or if you're over 49, then you are okay. Yeah.
What what towns in the metropolitan area besides Chicago do you work with?
We have a Southern Illinois director,
I'm talking about the Chicago metro area. Are you only in Chicago, or do you do Aurora? Do you do Waukegan? Do you do Blue Island? Or something? Areas that I know have populations that might need.
well, we cover all of it. We keep track of food pantries across all of it. But as far as DHS offices that we go to, We go to the one in Blue Island. We work specifically with DuPage. We work with Cane Aurora and Cane Elgin, Lake County. I can get you a list if you'd like.
I'm just curious, you made it sound like you're pretty much specific Chicago.
No, that's where our office is,
Okay.
but we are a statewide organization.
I'm curious, do you know any demographics about people who need assistance? Are most of them immigrants? Are most of them minorities? Are most of them lacking in high school education? Any relevant insight into what brings a person to the point where they're desperate for help?
Well, a lot of immigrants are not eligible for benefits, unfortunately, but certainly most of them do need that help, or many of them do. Lack of education is a big part of it, but we have seen people who have college degrees and who are still having a really hard time finding a job or finding a job that actually pays enough that they can feed their families. But certainly many people who are on benefits have a lack of education. There is a very high minority rate, but there are also a lot of people in southern Illinois who
that's
are
probably
white.
more related to lack of education too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about mental illness? Is that a large population or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very large population. There's a large population of people who are diagnosed and also a large population of people who are not diagnosed but who do struggle with those disabilities. There's also a lot of people with physical disabilities who have a hard time finding work again. So that actually is a big part of it, and a lot of seniors.
Oh.
We work with a lot of seniors who, have really struggled to kind of,
Subsistence.
yeah, exactly. And ones who are hit hard by economic changes. So,
So does Medicaid provide any food assistance, nutrition assistance? No.
no.
Other than like street people I've seen, like living on the street, I see a lot of homeless people, but it sounds like homeless people who are able-bodied don't qualify anyway. I see a lot of libraries. Do you outreach to libraries?
We do, yeah. Yeah, if a homeless person is considered to be able-bodied, they're still expected to work, which, we disagree with.
Do you find them jobs, or are they expected to find them themselves?
So basically, in the counties where the state will call people in and tell them you have to get employed, for that to happen, there have to be employment and training slots. So basically, the state will have contracted with an organization like, say, the Jane Addams Resource Corporation, which, they will help train people for, maybe a automation job or construction job, and then they will help them get that job. That said, there are very, very few slots. And so oftentimes you'll have thousands of people who are being told they have to get an employment or training, and you might have 30 slots.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so the state is not required to have a reasonable number of slots, they just have to have slots. So the DHS offices actually that we've been working with, a lot of the better ones are basically frantically trying to figure out how to find people jobs. They have not before been told that that is their job, but now they are. So, we've known office management who are basically going around the neighborhood to local pizza places trying to ask whether there are job opportunities to pass on to their clients. This is not something that has been the case in Illinois before, but it is a really major goal of Governor Rauner's.
Well, people sometimes say, well, McDonald's is always hiring. You're saying that is not true.
Compared to the number of people who need work, no, there are not enough opportunities. And, when people do get a job at McDonald's, oftentimes those types of jobs are, first of all, they're low paying. but many of those jobs will deliberately make it so somebody doesn't have enough hours to, get certain benefits, or they specifically have few enough hours that they, have uneven hours, so that people really are not able to support themselves. Or oftentimes, if they do have children, they have a really hard time taking care of their children and showing up to these jobs.
Yeah, because they may pick up a shift
Right.
or things like that, but that's not consistent. So whoever reviews the case will say you aren't consistent with this number of hours.
Right, if somebody works a job that is kind of uneven or that varies in income, then they actually usually have a pretty terrible time of getting benefits, because sometimes, they might go months without getting work at all, or they might go months of having very few hours and low income, and then there might be a particular month, like around Christmas maybe, when their income shoots up and they're no longer eligible, and they get kicked off of benefits, and then they have to reapply once they're eligible again.
Today, I had an opportunity to take a friend who couldn't meet her utility bill to Loaves and Fishes / Cares in Naperville. And I am really impressed with, in 3 hours' time, the kind of comprehensive help she was able to get, not only with that utility bill from 2 angles, one of which was through LIHEAP, which I guess is a statewide program.
It's a national program.
Yeah.
Okay. And then some other, and that will kick in, I guess, after 60 days, and then she's got something else that she hopes will kick in before that.
Mhm.
And she had never gone to the food bank before, and that was like shopping at a grocery store.
Yeah.
Since the last time I packed food in a warehouse several years ago, this was a real eye-opener. So I'm encouraged that people were all very caring. They had many volunteers there at the Loaves and Fishes. But when I paged through a jobs notebook, it looked like 95% of the opportunities were $12.50 an hour or less. House cleaning, working at a gas station or a service station or something like that.
Yeah. Exactly. And we know that it's only going to get harder going forward, that most jobs, that will actually pay a living enough that somebody can support themselves or a family, are going forward usually going to require some kind of post-secondary degree.
Oh, this
It's only
woman
going to
has
get
a
worse.
Graduate. This
Right.
woman has a master's and she had a well-paying job,
Yeah.
but she just can't get work now. She's in the too old to get a good job zone.
Right.
Yeah.
I heard a story, like many of us in this room, I suspect, I listen to NPR, and I heard a story on NPR about, I believe, the state of Oklahoma, who receives federal assistance for family support, and that the federal government has little to no oversight over the money once they distribute it. So I believe what I heard about Oklahoma was that they used some of that money to set up singles mixers parties, because their philosophy was that those people were getting ready to start a family and needed some help. So they helped single people meet each other and learn about being social with other young people. Anyway, the larger point is that according to what this NPR story was saying, once the money has left the federal government, the amount of oversight and the metrics that might be used to measure its success are so weak that states have a lot of latitude to spend the money in programs that aren't really helping the needy. Do you see any of that in Illinois?
Not really. The Midwest office of the U.S. Department of Agriculture is actually in Illinois, and they've been pretty closely engaged. There have been a lot of changes with Illinois DHS in the last couple of years, and USDA has been keeping a very close watch on them. In one of the examples of kind of the close oversight in Illinois is that there is a certain requirement that the local Department of Human Services offices process SNAP applications in a timely manner. And if a certain number of those applications go over 45 days without being processed, then the state of Illinois is actually fined. And this has been happening. And then USDA will basically require that Illinois come up with an action plan for how they are going to get back on track. And then Illinois actually has to do that action plan while they are being eyeballed by the USDA. So I don't know about Oklahoma. One of the things that kind of, that sounds almost like, I'm blanking on the word, but...
Urban legend?
No, actually, it's one of the things Paul Ryan really wants to do on public benefits.
Block grant?
Block grant. That's where we are. Yeah, that almost sounds like block granting. Because when they block grant a program, basically they're saying, we're giving you this pool of money, but you as the state can decide to spend it how you want.
Yeah.
So you can basically decide, well, I think all of this should go to child care programs and we'll just ignore the SNAP program, or we'll just ignore Medicaid. And that is the state's right. Whereas currently the federal government does basically say there are strings attached to this money. This is a guideline for how you spend it. Obviously there is a lot of leeway that the state can do, but there are guidelines. They are supposed to spend this amount of money on this program.
Yeah, this was not SNAP money specifically, but it was a federal program that supposedly was to help support poor people.
Yeah, it might have been a program that is less oversight.
But on the other hand, there may be some wisdom behind that. If there are a lot of young people who are having trouble finding good work, and if two people can live more resourcefully together, or more than two, than one alone, there may be some wisdom in that.
This is a tangential issue, and I know you're in Chicago, but do you have any opinion on literacy programs such as Literacy DuPage in terms of how people, for example, a couple of years ago took training to be a tutor, and about halfway through the program realized that I really wasn't being trained as a literacy tutor. I was being trained as an instructor in English as a second language. And not only that, but also social work skills, which I don't have, in that you were sort of expected that you were going to help these people go to the emergency room. And here's how you fill out a form in the emergency room. Or at the post office, here's how you fill out a postal money order if you're sending it back to Nicaragua. Or here's how you deal with the local police if your son or daughter's in trouble. And these were really social work skills dealing with English as a second language. I talked to the director of Literacy DuPage at the time, and she said there was a back list of 300 applicants to be subjects in the program. I asked if she had any that had basic English skills who could use a tutor to improve their skills and improve their job abilities. That would not be a problem in Kentucky or West Virginia. But she did not have one that she could give to me. It was all English as a second language, and the social skills that you had to work with to develop with those people.
Yeah. I haven't worked directly with Literacy DuPage.
They should change the title.
Yeah, we have encountered a lot of people in all areas of the state who absolutely do speak English, but who do have a really big problem with literacy. Just in terms of the issue of public benefits, people get letters that give them important information, like telling them that they have to come into the office, otherwise their benefits will end. And the letters are not necessarily written in the most easily understandable language. Usually they are not. So a lot of people just do not reach the literacy level to understand what the letter is telling them to do. So that is a real problem. Obviously, English as a second language is also a really big need. And in terms of them kind of expecting you to be social workers, I think unfortunately that's a pretty common thing that a lot of organizations have to ask their volunteers essentially to do. Just because when you're working with somebody who is in need of one service, they're usually in need of 50. So organizations just kind of end up doing that even if they didn't really intend to at the start.
The families that have kids, say, in high school have a great advantage because those students are able to help their parents. They can read the letters and,
Right.
encourage their parents to learn and so forth. And so
Sometimes they'll go into the offices and act as interpreters.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it can be a burden on the students, but the adults that don't have those in-house aides really need the most help of all.
Yeah.
How anonymous are the SNAP cards now? Because I'm old enough to remember where you literally were carrying things out of a booklet in order to, well, I grew up in Utah, so in order to hand it over to someone, and so everyone in line knew you were on food stamps.
You get mailed a card, and it's basically like a credit card, but it does have that distinctive, it says link on it. So if somebody knows what a link card looks like, they're going to know what it is.
Do people feel like that's stigmatizing? I mean, if it's that obvious, if it's that...
I think people are always going to be embarrassed. I have heard stories of people who basically will go grocery shopping outside of their neighborhoods just because they don't want anyone to know that they are on SNAP. So I think, yeah.
So how cynical are you? I mean, it sounds like they're up against a lot, but there are people who are trying to help. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, I'll be brutally honest that meetings these days are not very fun. But that said, there are a lot of really good, really smart, dedicated people who are working extremely hard on all of these issues, and that's both on a kind of county level, on a state level, and on a national level. I think there is a lot of talent that is being put into this, and you can win an issue. We honestly really didn't think that we were going to be able to convince Ronner to apply for the able-bodied adults without dependents waiver this year. The information we were getting was that he was decided against it. But at the very last minute, he did apply. So that was a really big victory for us, even though at the time, even when that was happening, many of our organizations were, struggling to survive given the budget crisis in Illinois, and how many organizations' fundings were extremely cut, and people were bleeding workers. We were still able to win a victory that helped 216,000 people in the state be able to get SNAP. So even when things are extremely dire, you can still win issues.
Is the waiver just an executive function, or could something be done through legislation?
The governor has to
So
apply.
it's only executive, okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Are you seeing any effects of the recent national election, and are you concerned about the future of your job since the new president is going to make America great again and bring back lots of good paying jobs? Is that really jeopardizing your position?
We do get quite a bit of our funding from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So depending on what he does with that, we could definitely be impacted. I think there are definitely a lot of different issues that are being made great again.
Well, if there's all these great
So-
jobs, there won't be any need for that.
That's my point.
Yeah, right.
And I'm
Yeah.
not cynical.
Yeah. So I think that we work with one refugee organization in Kane County, and they had a bunch of families that were scheduled to come over this year. And many of those families are no longer coming over because the doors have been shut on them. And these were people who'd been going through a process of years to get approved. So, there are things like that we're seeing. I think a lot of organizations are very concerned. We work a lot with people who are on Medicaid only because of the Affordable Care Act, which expanded Medicaid. Before the Affordable Care Act, in order to get Medicaid, you had to be pregnant, have a very young child, be a senior, or be a minor. If you were, or have a registered disability. If you were an able-bodied adult without a dependent, then no matter how poor you were, you could not get free health insurance. You could be homeless and have no income, and you could not get help from the government to pay medical bills. The Affordable Care Act changed that. It basically said that if you are below a certain income, that's it. You should be able to get help paying for medical bills. And I don't know how many people are familiar with the Republican proposal to replace Obamacare, but basically it says that that Medicaid expansion would end in 2020. So many of the people that we see who are on both SNAP and Medicaid, their lives, frankly, would be at risk if that happened.
Does that mean that no people will be added, or that the people on the program will be cut in 2020?
The people on the program will be cut in 2020. They would lose their health insurance. So, there are a number of fronts on which we are kind of dealing with the national election.
Can you speak a little bit about what either your group is doing or what is being done to combat the idea that people in these programs are taking advantage of that? I can't tell you how many times I've heard that they're just going out and taking advantage of it. It's obviously not true. Some of those people may be able to have their minds changed, and some may not. But
And one thing that a lot of people don't know is the majority of SNAP fraud is actually committed by grocery stores. It's not committed by SNAP recipients. One of the trainings I do is SNAP myths versus facts, where I basically go over most of those. But also that's one of the main reasons why we do find it important to basically go into communities and work with the people who are actually on benefits and introduce them to their legislators and help them go to town halls and tell their stories. It's a lot easier, I think, to demonize this group if you don't know anyone from them. Once you kind of see them as human, it's a lot harder to dismiss them. So